Hello everyone, another video here on the channel. I ask everyone to subscribe, feel free to leave comments, and today's topic is the idea of love for modern women. There's a video, which I'll leave in the description, made by Uncle MGTOW some time ago, where he explains what this thing called love really is. It's an amazing production. He goes back and reconstructs everything from the transition between the Middle Ages and the modern age, when the ladies of the court started to appear, and then later, Romanticism was introduced, along with the idea of conquest and the White Knight. Later on, books and writings in Europe, already more in the 16th and 17th centuries, right, and those give a good idea of what this so-called love is all about. So, just so you can clearly see and fully comprehend how incredibly misleading this pervasive notion of Eros love, of intense passion, and of relentless conquest truly is, this is actually a relatively recent invention within the long history of humanity, and our contemporary generation has witnessed this phenomenon intensify significantly, largely propelled through the pervasive influence of Hollywood culture. Right, and even more so nowadays with the widespread availability of streaming platforms like Netflix and so on. And the main driving force behind the exposure of love today, and why everyone feels the need to explain what love is, are social media, right? Especially Instagram, where you'll find a million pages that all sorts of frustrated single women are following, and they're all talking about what love is, the right person, connection, that whole spiel, Yeah, so, Eros love, right, has always been, according to the greatest minds in history, not just men, okay? Many women, like Esther Villar herself and other great writers and psychologists, have always identified it as a kind of illness. It's like someone who's in that state. Alida describes this really well in his books, right? Someone who's infected by the virus of passion, they go blind, right? They see the object of their passion, which in this case is the woman they're in love with, as a lifeline. So, later on, I recommend you check out the video by Uncle MGTOW, What is this thing called love? If I'm not mistaken, there's a part 1 and a part 2. I'll leave the link in the description for you to check out later, because it's a spectacular video, really spectacular. He explains how love was constructed in society, this whole notion of falling in love. Whereas for millennia, men and women always got married for the purpose of procreation or for social contract reasons, right? There was never this disease of love. In fact, many indigenous and Eastern peoples don't have this whole thing about falling in love. It's a very, very Western thing. It was brought here from Europe, right, through literature and the culture of the modern age, and later on with movies and social media here in the West as a whole. In the United States, in Brazil, and throughout the Americas, right? And over in Europe, it's still like that today. Yeah, but now getting into the topic of modern single women, right, how they see love, and some who are dating too, mainly those who are in relationships, especially newer ones. Because those who are in longer-term relationships, in healthy relationships, haven't been as affected by this. I'm going to make a video talking about the few relationships that still work in society here in Brazil. So if you ask a woman what love is, you'll hear the most absurd answers, sophistries, delusions, and every cliché imaginable, right? Yeah, you'll hear them say it's companionship, it's giving it herself, it's partnership, it's empathy, and so on. They'll even use some elements that could make up agape love, right? Which is that selfless love, the love of doing good without expecting anything in return. That's the only true love that exists, agape, right? Eros is a huge illusion, and people are out there doing crazy things because of it. Some men, yeah, they lose themselves over this, right? But more and more men are waking up. These 20s are going to be known as the great holocaust of the single women, because when women finally decide to settle down and look for the great love of their lives, the men they want, at even a minimally acceptable level, are going to be really scarce, and all that will be left is the bottom of the barrel, what they themselves consider the lowest of the low. So the situation is pretty critical for women over 25 who are single, okay? Really, really critical. They're basically counting on a stroke of luck, right? Only about 1 to 5% will actually manage to pull it off. Yeah, so the idea of love for women, for the modern Instagram woman, with all those stories showing her life, the gym, bikinis, her butt, and so on. Notice, once again, as I say in all my videos, because someone might always stumble in here by accident, some unsuspecting guy or girl, right? I'm not making a moral judgment about this. I don't make moral judgments. This is a channel that exposes reality through the lens of stimuli and rewards in the environment. What certain stimuli, what certain actions cause, right, through the rewards they generate, especially in the realm of pleasure, of dopamine, right, of this great human sugar that is social media. It's so addictive, especially for women, right? ego validation, the likes, that's something wonderful for them. Yeah, so women see love, right? First of all, for women, there's a time for love, you know? Usually, she needs to live her life first, go to college, not worry too much about that. Because every single woman, okay? Every single woman, no exception, alright? When I say every single woman, no exception, I mean 99.9%, okay? Because someone might say, oh, I know someone who really doesn't get attached. I know people like that too, okay? But it's like 1 in 10,000, 1 in 100,000. So, without generalizing, you can't explain, you can't make a video about anything, right? You can't explain any topic at all. So, exceptions don't make the rule, but in Brazil, everyone loves to take the exception as the rule. So, in more than 99% of single women, they are absolutely certain, okay? Most of them, whether through spiritual, shamanic, astrological means, anyway, always invoking something higher or metaphysical, believe they're going to have a happy ending, okay? So, they go to college, get a post-grad degree, travel, for those who can afford it, do an exchange program, have fun, post photos, meet the wrong people until they meet the right one. That's a phrase they're using now. I don't know if it's from some country song or whatever, right? Or maybe funk, I don't know. So women are absolutely certain. It's something. It's like a papal decree in their lives. Something unshakable, that they really will have a happy ending, right? And they believe in this happy ending because they idealize love, as if the person will be their perfect match. If they really acted that way, if they really got together, and built a family, right? And if a monogamous relationship, a dating relationship, a marriage with those people who are compatible with them, society would be working perfectly. There wouldn't be any leftover women crisis. You'd have singlehood and divorce rates around 5, 10%, not over 40% divorce like it is in Brazil now, and the trend of more than 50% of women being single in society in these 20s. And for women rated 6 and up, it's going to be around 90, 95%. In other words, the ones who are single today, who are attractive and above, rated 6, 6.5 and up, right? Yeah, because the women of lower value, those who unfortunately were born with less favorable genetics, they tend to end up marrying some partners there, right? Yeah, just like in the outskirts, in poorer areas, you still see people marrying each other, even though there are a lot of reports from people living in those areas saying that hypergamy has reached there too, and it's unstoppable as well. So maybe the collapse is even bigger than what we're talking about here on this channel. And I have to admit, this channel does have a bit of an apocalyptic tone, but the apocalypse is right there at our doorstep, isn't it? It's not like we're rooting for everything to go up in flames, or for the world to end. No, it's happening, and sometimes I think, when I talk to some friends, that what I'm saying here, I think it might actually be even worse. It might turn out even worse than what I'm saying here. So, you're going to have a huge horde of single women, right? And this whole thing about love is because they say it has to be the right person, the compatible person, the right match. Sorry, folks, this is an unedited video. Sometimes let me clear my throat here to keep it as natural as possible. So, taking a breath, let's go. If a woman stayed with that guy, she has if you take away from women the mechanisms of external validation, right? Which are, the likes, the life of luxury, the places she goes to, right? Which are, those yachts, those super expensive restaurants that some guys pay for just to have casual sex and then disappear, right? Anyway, if you remove those elements that damage women in the long run, when I say damage, I mean they damage themselves, their psyche, they end up sadder, okay? I'm not saying, like, ruin in the sense of a woman becoming impure or anything like that. No, I mean in the sense that she actually feels bad. Yeah, a lot of these women have a guy at their level or a little above who would make a good match, would make for a nice relationship. I think many of you, and myself too, have met some women in life where you met them in their purest state. Because a woman isn't hypergamous, manipulative, or insensitive all the time. There are moments when a woman actually enjoys the things she says she likes on Instagram, like simplicity, the little moments, just sitting on the sidewalk and talking. Every now and then, even the most materialistic women in the world, the most useless ones, have those moments, right? Yeah, just like even the biggest players out there, every now and then they'll have a genuine connection with someone, even if it's fleeting and short-lived. So, I think a lot, and not just me, but many of you have probably met someone where you think, damn, man, if this girl didn't have Instagram, if it were like 15 years ago, we would have been an awesome couple, but unfortunately she's out there dreaming about some super well-traveled, millionaire Instagram heir who she thinks she's going to land just because he liked her bikini photo. Right? So, women, What do they say love is, right? For the modern woman, love would be this compatibility. Sometimes it's right there next to her, you know? And they start talking about this after 30, after the stream of men chasing them dries up, because beauty fades, fertility, youth, everything goes downhill, and that's when they start to value it, right? People who are close by, like, oh, you are always here. Today I realized, yeah, there are women who still manage to snag some sucker and even post about it, right? Like, you brought peace to my life, meaning, you saved me from this wild lifestyle, or whatever, right? They write captions like that. It's kind of gross, right? You can tell the woman doesn't even like the guy. She's just there as, I have a friend who uses the perfect term for this, the overwhelming majority of men getting into relationships these days, right? And there are fewer and fewer of them, but the ones who are getting into relationships, the vast majority are basically consolation prizes, right? Because what a woman imagines as love, well, that's not what she actually goes for in practice. So, like, a woman is only capable of loving, you know, a man who's totally set apart, unpredictable, who gives her excitement all the time, right? That's why a woman's idea of love involves, like, paradise-like images, expensive trips, you know? Yeah, those perfect photos eating pizza and playing video games, like you see in some campaigns. Some companies, lots of big companies, conglomerates, do that, right? Those, you know, couple images and all that, that partnership, the pet, the big house, the beach, and so on, right? Skiing in the snow, which is a lifestyle that's out of reach for more than 95% of Brazilians, right? Women have a huge difficulty, just like many men do, in accepting that the environment is totally rotten for dating. Even if a lot of people don't agree, women in general, the overwhelming majority, have a really hard time accepting that Brazil is a poor country, right? I really hammer on this point here because the truth needs to be told, right? Oh, its GDP grew. Oh, the economy. Yeah, but that only benefited a handful of people, you know? It benefited about 1%, the big sharks in agribusiness, bankers, speculators, and so on, right? Capitalism is just rigged, you know, it's a speculative bubble. Yeah, women can only seem to idealize love with those couples, like Whindersson Nunes and Luisa Sonza, right? Yeah, Caio Castro and whoever else, right? They see these minor celebrities or that couple from their own town, like the heir with a pretty girl, traveling around, and motherhood, some clever ones manage to snag a rich guy. And these women do a hell of a lot of harm to other women. The average woman, I mean, sorry, the pretty middle-class woman who lands a rich guy, she messes up the minds of 10, 20,000 women in her city easily, especially if it's a medium or small-sized city, okay? Because she's going to have a bunch of followers watching her perfect life, her marriage, and all that, and people start to idealize that as love, right? So women idealize as love what they think is love, but in reality, it's pure eros, right? It's that crazy passion, just emotions. And the guys who can give them that, well, most of them don't want to date them, right? These guys, when they finally decide to settle down after living it up, they're going to go for a much younger girl with a really clean past, right? And of course, they're not going to say that out loud so they don't get attacked by feminists, right? In other words, the guy is just following his biology, looking for youth, fertility, and beauty. He's been doing that for 7 million years, and there are people who say that's just a social construct. Just goes to show you the level of mental illness society has reached. And then women go, so these guys, they only get married when they're much older, to much younger and beautiful women, right? Yeah, these guys, they're rare. There aren't many of them, right? There are only a few available, and a lot of them just don't care anymore and have no interest in dating or getting married ever, you know? So there's just a handful left of men who can be caught that women will keep trying to idealize as love. That's what they call local love, right? This aberration that I just described, right? Yeah, it's nothing more than a construction by certain players on social media, right, who figured out the right photo angles, the captions, you know, the kind of adverbs to use to explain certain things, some trigger words. There's a whole social engineering behind it, with people who are just laughing at all this. I know, okay, some operators from the underworld. I talk to these guys from time to time, alright? People who work in this area of creating these perfect environments. A lot of these guys are MGTOW and they actually want to watch the world burn, okay? They're laughing about it. They're the so-called honk pill, right? Honk is an H-O-N-K. That's the honk pill. When you take it, that's when you become the real clown, right? It's an American slang for someone who's laughing at the collapse of society, right? Dressed as a clown, you know? And like, it's Pepe the Frog dressed as a clown, right? It's funny, that whole thing. So, this idea that women have about love, It's an illusion and a small number, and it's funny because a lot of those couples they admire end up breaking up. And when they do break up, that's when women have a reality check. Like I said, there are moments when they're in their purest, smartest, nicest version of themselves, right? When they enjoy the simplicity they claim to like, but in reality, they want luxury and excitement. But every now and then, they have a lapse like that. When those couples they think are perfect break up, then they say, wow, that was all just for show. The guys are right. That's all just a facade. It's a lie. Instagram is a circus. It's an illusion. It's the Matrix. Right? And the women say, oh, that's not true. They're happy. You're just jealous. You're just bitter. Then someone like Luisa Sonza goes and breaks up with Wynderson Nunes, right? Or that girl who posts a perfect life from her city, who breaks up with her boyfriend or husband. Then they have a reality check and say, yeah, it's all a lie anyway. But that only lasts a few days, then time goes by, and they say, no, with me it's going to be. They always think it's going to be different for them, right? That the love they're going to live, the great love they're going to experience, is waiting for them, right? So, it's like a disconnect from reality, right? Something that there's never been anything like it in human history, right? The axis of reality, What would be the axis of reality? A woman who's a 6, maybe a 7, instead of being with a guy who's a 7, 7.5, just a little above her, which would be a compatible match. And there are plenty of people who, I'm not going to say soulmates, because soulmate is a really strong word, right? But there are plenty of people out there who are compatible with each other, right? They could make a great couple, but the woman, because of all these influences, won't accept this guy, because she'll always think someone better will come along, right? And you can see it happening, right? These women from the 90s are more and more single, always making lame jokes about women who are in relationships on Valentine's Day, and so on, right? All that Sunday night mess, that's when it really turns into a circus of horrors, right, on Instagram, when they start with their reflections and sophistries. So the idea of love that women have, besides being the basest kind of love there is, which is an Eros version of love, right? Which is the most shallow version there is, it's a vision that doesn't even exist, based on the Matrix and Instagram relationships, right? And it's never going to work out for them because the math doesn't add up, and they're losing more and more men who could actually be good partners, because these guys are waking up. When they finally decide they want these guys, and when they're over 30, these guys are just going to brush them off, tell them to screw off, and that's exactly what's happening, okay? So, that's it. Let's wrap up today's video with this topic about what love means to modern women. Take care, and see you next time.